Marc Freedman has a purpose. As managing partner and co-founder of Evolved Profits, he and his team have over 40 years of experience in helping businesses free up cash so that it can be reinvested into helping employees, growing the business, and creating positive social impact. He is a serial entrepreneur, CEO, and the best-selling author of Expense to Profit: Eliminate the Costs That Sabotage Your Growth. Marc loves helping companies create more profits while being an agent for change. This is his purpose, and in an effort to help more companies and more people, Marc, along with co-host Yanik Silver, author of Evolved Enterprise, bring you Profits with Purpose, a podcast that aims to do just that. On the show, Marc and Yanik talk to successful corporate decision makers, exploring valuable lessons learned, experiences in growing a company, ways to reduce expenses, and all the ways a company can have a positive social impact. Join us each week and get in on the discussion so we can all have more profits with purpose. And now, here's your host, Marc Freedman.
Good morning. Our guest today is Trevor Blake. Trevor has a unique business structure based on model of alliances. He's founded and managed and sold 3 companies since 2003 for a combined value over $300 million. With a degree in radiation physics and nuclear medicine, Blake worked as a therapeutic radiographer in a cancer treatment hospital in the UK. He's currently founder and CEO of 3 companies in varied industries, which he runs simultaneously. His unique business approach is based on higher profitability, non-employee model, which frees him to enjoy other interests as well as writing, a coach, and an animal welfare activist. Trevor is also a New York Times bestselling author of 3 Simple Steps, a map to success in business and life, and Secrets to a Successful Startup, a recession proof guide to starting, surviving, and thriving in your own venture. Welcome, Trevor.
Thank you, Marc. That's an impressive introduction. I feel like I want to meet this guy.
Well, I'm truly blessed that we're going to have this opportunity to do that. But very interesting with everything in your background. Can you give us a little bit about your backstory, kind of a short synopsis about not only your medical background, but also your businesses that you've created and the books you've authored, realizing that this is a bigger ask than normal, but give our audience maybe a short synopsis of your professional career as you can.
It's actually simpler, I think, Marc, than you'll expect, because I grew up in the UK. Obviously, you can tell by my accent. Hopefully, it hasn't changed too much. I grew up very poor. My mother was given 6 months to live when I was 7, and my dad went a bit crazy with the pressure of having to bring up 3 kids. So he became unemployable and unemployed the rest of my life. So we lived on welfare, and that had happened to his father too, and his father before him. And I could see the pattern, and I didn't want that for me. So I had to do something different. I found a way to do something different, which we can talk about as we go through this conversation. And I got out of what I would say was my version of quicksand, and used what became the 3 Simple Steps. The book is what I used to get out of quicksand when I was 16, 17, 18 years old. And joined the Royal Navy, then worked in a hospital because that's where I met my wife, and I became a stalker. It's the only reason I ended up working in a hospital. And she was a nurse there. And then had a regular career in the pharma business, but I'm not good at the regular career. I'm not good at the corporate BS. And so was always considered something of a maverick, which is probably the politest term I was ever called. So I started my own company in 2003. And as you rightly said in the introduction, I built and sold 3 companies. And I currently have 3 more that I'm working with now. But I did use a unique business model because in my regular career, I spent so much time, probably 75% of my regular career, sitting in a room like you're in, actually, like in a boardroom where we sat around as a group, and everything that can be said has been said, but not everybody's said it yet. And it just went mad. It's just corporate madness. And I didn't do well with that. So I decided I needed to get out. And my business model basically was the opposite of that, which was I'm going to go with a sort of contract and vendor model, which used to be called virtual, but that's unpopular. Then it became hub, that's unpopular. So now we have a fancy title, model of alliances, but it's all the same thing. And it just means that I'm free to grow the business and behave like an entrepreneur instead of holding the hands of disgruntled employees all the time. That's the only difference.
So your impressive and unique backstory is really great. I guess some might say you're a unique animal, and that what you've worked at and started in the numerous companies and business endeavors. But overall, if you had to speak to it succinctly, What is the purpose of your business life, and what is your bigger why, as Simon Sinek would ask?
All right, that's really simple. That's a good question, actually. It's straightforward. So I don't do the mission, vision, values nonsense. I've spent so many years sitting in the meeting room deciding what animal we look like as a company and rubbish like that. So my companies, all 6 companies, have had the same mantra, and it is to make a positive impact in people's lives, to have fun doing it, and to share in all the rewards, material and otherwise, which come naturally as a result of setting that energy and flow. And that's basically it. And I've gone with that approach. I don't see the point of starting a company unless it's going to be impactful. And I don't see the point of even being an entrepreneur unless you're going to have fun. And then when you put those 2 things together, the rest comes naturally. The money and the spiritual rewards and the thrill of it all comes naturally, I find.
Pretty cool. So you've got a lot of experience starting and growing business in a way that makes them enticing to be bought by others. And I would guess the 3 enterprises you're in right now is probably going to have a similar path and similar conclusion. What do you believe holds back businesses the most in terms of how they're viewed by investors or those who may be interested in purchasing a company outright?
Difficult question to answer. Let me sort of preempt the answer by saying the reason that I build a company until to the point where it's attractive to others and gets sold is because I get bored easily. And I think one of the things I find with entrepreneurs is that they don't really sit down and take time to identify what sort of creature they are. Are you a builder or are you a maintainer? And I don't think the 2 go together. And so I find a lot of entrepreneurs hold on to their company to the point where it almost peaks, and then they can't let go of their baby. And they smother the baby, and then it goes, and then it becomes more and more unattractive as time goes by. But one thing I've learned is that I'm not very good. Once I've built something, I'm not very good at maintaining it. I just don't have the mentality and the enthusiasm for it. So while it's on the up, like investing in stocks, sell into the profit. Don't wait till it peaks and then try and get out before it collapses. So I do the same thing with companies. But the reason it seems to work quite well is I think this is the energy of the time that we're in. I'm very much into quantum physics, so I'm really interested in energy, and so I've watched this shift of sort of planetary energy from a sort of slow, linear, masculine type energy where companies lasted a long time. Average age of a company was a publicly traded company was 75 years up until about 10 years ago. Now it's down to 15 years. So I've watched this sort of time where the masculine energy gets switched out into what I call we have to give it labels. It's not a gender conversation, but it goes into this swirling type of energy we call feminine energy. And that means rapid adaptation and short lifespans for a lot of companies, especially small companies. Like I'm a one-man band, so the lifetime for a company like mine is going to be very short. And if I don't observe that and act upon that, there's going to be a point where I've held on just slightly too long, and technological change or competition suddenly appears out of nowhere. And it's a bit like Blockbuster. I mean, the guy that built Blockbuster sold it about 2 years before it collapsed, before Netflix was heard of. It's all about I use my intuition an awful lot because I was blessed to be surrounded by very powerful women who were very intuitive. So I've learned to deepen my intuition. So when my intuition says, I think this is the time, I don't debate that. I just, I hope the company goes on to be even more successful, but I need to quit at that point. So one of the biggest mistakes, if you can call it a mistake, that I find that especially new entrepreneurs, first-time entrepreneurs make, is that they become so attached to their little baby that it's very hard for them to let go.
Yeah, very, very interesting. We've seen that many, many times. Has there been a time, like in your different businesses, where you saved considerable money by just renegotiating a contract? And if you did, what lessons did you learn from that process that our audience could apply to their own businesses or their own contracts?
Yeah, a couple of things. So first of all, in the running of the business, I've always taken the approach that it's more important to get the best partner than the best price. And that then leads to the second point for me, which is one of the issues I think that a lot of entrepreneurs have is they come from the corporate world and they've been brought up to negotiate almost pathologically. It's like negotiate every I, dot every I and cross every T of a contract. And what I find is, I have to remind myself, even though the numbers look good, but I'm not Google and I'm not Amazon. So I'm a small player or a small fish in a huge ocean. And so if I start to play the game with a bigger company that wants to buy me, or a vendor that I really particularly want to do part of my business for me, and I start to mess around with contracts for a long period of time or bring an army of lawyers in, they walk away. And they just don't have the time. And I've been with, in my regular career, I've been with people who just don't get that. I had a CEO once who just wanted to negotiate everything in a contract. And our company was about to go out of business because we'd gone through 4 rounds of financing and still didn't have a product. And he couldn't see that. And so he's a friend of mine, so I'm not talking behind his back. And we talk about it even today. And so he couldn't see that. And we were negotiating with Amgen, which is a huge biotech, and we were tiny with not even any revenue. And they wanted one of our patents, and they offered us 5 million for us, and that would have kept us going another year. But my friend insisted, that was my job, was the negotiations. My friend insisted that I negotiate for better price. And I kept warning him, they'll walk away because we're not worth their time. And sure enough, they walked away and they never came back. And so that was a really important lesson for me, thankfully in a regular career, but it didn't hurt me as much. So when I started my first company, I made sure that I wasn't the best vendor. Surely, because they're working with all these other big companies and who have the army of lawyers, the contract they send to me, the template, has got to be pretty well, gone through by armies of lawyers over the years. So all I really have to do is change the name and the date and just leave it at that. And for someone like me who was also brought up in the corporate world and in a supervisory mold, which makes you sort of a control freak, it's really hard to sit on your hands and just let that happen. But I'm so glad that I learned that lesson because it served me a lot. It's more about the speed, because I had an experience where I was investing in a company and the executive team had somebody who thought that they were a lawyer. They weren't, and so they negotiated a lawyer thing, and they were offered 5 million in seed capital, which would have set them up just beautifully. And he negotiated every word in the contract. And I kept saying to him, you don't know what's happening on the other side. I mean, their staff could change. Someone could come in and not like you. And that's exactly what happened. They got a new chief business officer, and he said, hold all the deals. I want to understand what I'm getting into. And they were sort of, been negotiating for 6 months or so. And he looked at the deal and said, no, I don't like this one. So they missed out on 5 million cash, which is a beautiful starting amount, simply because their egos got the better of them. So
I would like to say that most everything that you've been based on what we found looking at all of your different businesses and stuff, that I would say they're mostly purpose driven, right? And how can we understand why purpose driven companies have more satisfied employees, and what you believe they also have from a higher market share and higher market gains and higher customer satisfaction because of that purpose-driven mission of a business?
Well, I always remember Richard Branson saying once, don't even think about starting a company unless it's really something really irritates you, something that's got under your skin. And that's where the purpose comes from. And I believe that's so important. In my book, Secrets to a Successful Startup, I talk about, right in chapter 1, is about how to come up with a winning idea. And a winning idea is a purpose idea. And it's not about, I don't meet a lot of people who set out to be entrepreneurs. I meet a lot of people who tried to find a solution and then they realized there is no solution. And then they got so frustrated, they said, well, I'll fix it myself, even though I don't know what I'm doing. This is what I do. When I start, I feel out of my depth because I don't know what I'm doing. I'm in an industry in a market that I don't know yet, but I'll just start, and we're smart. Humans are smart. We'll figure it out. And so you become an entrepreneur almost by default. But the fact that you're trying to fix something that needs fixing or create something that doesn't exist gives you that sense of purpose. And I think when you do that, because you have an advantage when you start, because clearly, if you haven't found a solution, it doesn't exist. So now you have, 100% of a potential market, a niche market, at least at that point in time. And that's where, for me, that's where the sense of purpose comes from. My first company, I knew of a company that had solutions to rare childhood diseases sitting on the shelf and hadn't pulled it off the shelf because they couldn't justify the cost and the market. And I just felt, that's wrong. And I wanted to fix that. And I came across a physician who dealt with some of these little babies that had this issue. And I was frustrated because it was so easy to solve the issue for him and for the kids. So then my purpose became, how can I design a business model that can be profitable and can get that off the shelf and get it into the hands of the specialist. And it's been like that through all my companies. But my most recent company, we developed people told me this was impossible. Don't even go down this rabbit hole. You're a fool. Everyone's told me that. But we developed a non-toxic treatment for cancer. And everyone says that's not possible. And I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not a biologist or a chemist, but I knew that I could find the right people and the right business model to make that happen. And that became my purpose. And so everybody, to answer your question fully, I use a model of vendors and contractors rather than employees. I just find it that we live in a world of get big fast, and you get big fast with people who know what they're doing. You don't have to spend time supervising and training. And so what I found with all those vendors and contractors, I was probably their smallest client, but they got the most satisfaction and the most inspiration from working on what we were doing because we had that purpose. And a lot of the stuff they did with the other things was just sort of everyday and banal in their minds. So I probably got more of their time and effort and enthusiasm than I actually paid for, because they enjoyed working on this project because it had impact.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we do. That's how we live. Our life is, profits with an impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now I've got, I think what's probably going to be the most interesting question so far. Talk to us about the practical magic of the 5-hour workday. And is that as literal as it sounds, or is this something that all professionals or companies can realistically, successfully achieve?
I think it's essential. I really believe this wholeheartedly. It's in me. It's part of my core. I've got to confess that I very rarely work 5 hours. I probably do typically 2. And I might count this today. This probably will count as part of my 2 hours of work, I would say. So the business model helps you achieve that. My motivation for this is when before I started my first company, everyone's an expert, right? So even people who've never had a company, never even thought of it, are telling you, oh, you're going to have to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's cutthroat and all this kind of thing. And I found it to be the opposite. But I also realized very quickly, coming from the corporate world, I'm fairly productive, and so I'm working productively. And I started in my office when I first started my first company. I started in my office about 8, which is a mistake. It's too early. So I started in the office at 8 o'clock in the morning, and by 10 o'clock, I'm sort of twiddling my thumbs because I've been so productive. And I realized that when I was in the corporate world, and on all the studies back this up, I was only productive for about 2 hours a day. The rest of the day was in meeting rooms talking about nonsense, about employee happiness and all this kind of stuff, or what color to paint a sign or something, or should the employees be allowed a snow day, those that didn't come in yesterday. I mean, just nonsense. And a lot of the employees are on the internet most of the time. They're on the phone. They're at the coffee machine and stuff like that. So when all the studies that have looked at effectiveness in the workplace come together, they show that the average employee, full-time employee, only is productive about 2.1 hours a day. And when you're an entrepreneur, you don't think about that. And so I found myself sitting in front of my computer, waiting for an email, waiting for the phone to ring, and thinking I must be doing something wrong because it's quiet. And I suddenly realized that burnout is a real issue for me as an entrepreneur, because I like to be busy. And a lot of my friends who had become entrepreneurs before me, they were working 16-hour days, but they were on their third marriage, and the kids didn't recognize them, and the dogs ignored them. I mean, I didn't want that life. I wanted a balanced life, because I was very happily married until my wife died last year. It was 40 years of a wonderful marriage. I didn't want to interfere in that. I didn't want my business to interfere in that, and vice versa. And so I decided to learn and study. So I studied about what was effective, and I found that if you structure your day around a 5-hour workday, so in my typical schedule would be 9 to 11 would be sort of my productive time, doing emails, analytical stuff, and all the rest of it. And then I would set an alarm for 11, and it didn't matter what I was doing. I'm stopping at 11, because the brain studies show that you can't concentrate for more than 2 hours. Everything you do after that brings diminishing returns. And I know that as a writer, because I love writing and I lose track of time. What I write in the first 2 hours is really worth keeping. And then the next day I look at what I wrote after the 2 hours and it goes in the shredder. I mean, it's terrible. So I do the same thing with business. So then at 11, I go for a walk, and I take an hour walk, and I get away from the analytical side of my brain. And that for me is where the magic happens. So we all experience that when you're in the shower, or you think of something completely different, you get an aha moment. Well, you probably have had the same experience, Mark. All the best ideas I've ever had have come in the quiet moments, the relaxation moments, that walking in the woods with 100%. Your dog.
Yeah.
That's why it's practical magic, because it's that hour walk is every bit as important, if not more important, than the 2 hours of work I just did. So then I would come back, I'd have lunch with my wife, and I'd go back to work at 2. I'd work from 2 to 4. I would always have a nap between, say, 1 and 2, because I also learned that NASA requires its pilots to have a nap after lunch because it increases their performance 34%. So I'm always working on what I call peak brain performance. So I'd work up till 4 o'clock, then take another break, maybe meditate or do something else. And then I would come back and finish up for half an hour or so. But the key thing in all of that is that before 9 o'clock, my devices are locked away and I can't be tempted to check text and emails. And it's too much of a temptation. It's too much of a temptation. And then at 5 o'clock, I lock everything up and I have separate devices for business and work so that the two can't clash. And so the overall outcome of that is kind of success with balance, I think, a happy life. And I think it surprises people because when they try it, I get loads of feedback from people trying it. They say, I'm much more productive now just working these 4 or 5 hours than I ever was working 12 or 14 hours. I was fooling myself that I was in the zone, is what they tell me. But actually, I was producing nothing. So I encourage people to try it. And you can get it's a free download, actually. There's no strings attached. It's on my website, trevorgblake.com. And you can just go, it's right there when you go into trevorgblake.com and download it. And I think most people find it fascinating because I also talk about the fact that this is how life used to be before the Industrial Revolution. The average worker only worked 4 hours a day, and they had their priorities as family, spirit, leisure, work in that order, which I like. Whereas, here in the Western world today, it's like work, 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 and work. And then we fit the rest in. And that's not a healthy lifestyle. So I like balance. And so that's what the practical magic of the 5-hour workday is all about. Get your life back.
So I'm going to skip over the next question because I was going to ask you how important work-life balance was, but I think we got a pretty good answer to that
it's
already.
Everything. Yeah,
right?
Yep.
I think, that 5-hour workday, that whole concept, I learned, like you did, many years ago, how productive I am at certain periods of the day as well. Although I think I forgot because I'm missing the 1 hour walk. I do break, at lunchtime to have a little bit of a snack, maybe a little bit more than a snack. Sometimes my wife reminds me. But that said, going out for a walk is probably a good idea. It allows you to clear your mind. It gives you some fresh air. So that I really like that idea. That's pretty cool.
Good.
Really pretty cool.
Try it today because it's magic. Because you go out by yourself and you walk among some trees or something, all kinds of magic stuff happens.
Right. But I think the clear thing is having the discipline to get away from the digital devices, because it's amazing how quick one can be interfered with from a thought process. Like, just for instance, like I used to, when an email came in, I thought it was important to answer them right away. Yeah, not so much. They can wait. And so I typically answer my emails 3 times during the day: early morning, midday, and later in the afternoon. Because as you already mentioned, you only have 2 hours of productivity, right? And some even say that, if you're in the middle of a concept or thought process and something interrupts you, it's going to take you 20 minutes to get back to where you were before you were interrupted for a 1-minute response in an email or whatever it is. Or, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I've read the same thing, and I totally believe that, because I do. I'm not a saint. I make mistakes. I screw up like everybody does. I observe how painful getting interrupted was. Yeah. And you lose that magic. You're onto something, and then it's just left you. It's disappeared. So I totally agree. I think also, something a lot of people don't think about, Mark, is having separate devices for work and business, so that you can't be tempted to. Because if I have the one device for everything and a WhatsApp dings, it's chemically impossible not to see who that was. Right? You can't say, "Oh, I'll ignore that." So you're going to look, and it could be family, and you think something's wrong, and then you're off on another. It takes you forever to get back to where you were.
Right, because now something else popped up too, and it's like, oh well, let me just look at that one. Before you know it, you're in a string of let me look at that one, right? So on your online, one of your online bios says that you employ a non-employee model, and you mentioned that already to your business approach. Is there something else that you can tell us exactly what that means and what you would suggest to other entrepreneurs or people who are trying to formulate this business concept that they think that's going to make a change or create an impact in the world that would help them? Because having employees is probably one of the most expensive part of a business, right? If you look at, a business that, let's just say, is doing 20 million in revenue, half of that, or at least 45% of that's going to be what we call belly buttons, right? Paying for employees and related expenses. So yeah, if you could just give us a little bit more insight into your model.
Yeah, so it's about starting off the right way, because I do come across, I do a lot of coaching and mentoring for particularly first-time entrepreneurs. Although today I'm finding that long-time entrepreneurs want to become more quasi-virtual or quasi-virtual. They want to get away from, I feel like father confessor instead of an entrepreneur these days. So they want to go back to that. But starting the right way is so important, because so many businesses go out too early. They go out because of cash flow mismanagement. Sometimes it's not their fault. We're always optimistic as entrepreneurs. So we think we're going to do better than we do. We think revenue is going to come in quicker. We think we have enough cash, right? Enough capital. And typically in the early days, it's a much more bumpy ride than that. And so what I find with a lot of entrepreneurs, especially those that come out of the corporate world, is they've got this great idea, they start, and the first thing they do, they think, well, hang on a sec, I was in finance in that company. I know nothing about sales. I'll hire a head of sales. I knew nothing about regulatory. I'll hire a head of regulatory. Manufacturing, don't even know how to spell it. I'll hire a head of manufacturing. And before they know it, they've taken that wonderful cash and they've spent it on all these experts. Whereas I think we have the capability, if we take the time in our regular career or before we start a career, to get some cross-functional training, which is what I was lucky enough to do in my regular career. So I was a pain in the neck to everybody in the business, because I would go into their office and say, tell me about your business. Tell me what you do. What do you do join 9 to 5? And what are your issues and all the rest of it? And I think you get enough, you can't become an accountant just watching a controller work, but you can learn enough about what are the key issues and what are the key opportunities and how do you integrate, to have the confidence to not immediately hire a bunch of people. Maybe just hire what you need, and a contractor for a few hours, and because you've got enough confidence about that function, whether that's working well or not. And the reason I say that is that the way people normally behave, the analogy I use is, if you buy a new house, you wouldn't hire a full-time handyman to live in a spare bedroom just in case something went wrong. But that's what people do. And for the first 2 or 3 weeks, these new employees are really busy and excited and thrilled because they're working for a startup. And then they're bored very quickly, because things don't go in a straight line. And you'll have these periods where nothing seems to be happening and everyone's panicking. And then after a year, the employee who was so enthusiastic and loving being part of the ownership of building something special says, if you don't give me a 20% pay rise, I'm out of here. And they're taking the knowledge with them. I've seen that happen time and time again. And you don't want that, especially in the first 1 or 2 years. So if you can find a way to give yourself the self-confidence, which is, the number one thing for success in business, if you can find a way to get a little bit of cross-functional training, you can do it online, you don't have to do an MBA. And so you have a little bit of confidence in each of the functions, then you can go with the model of alliances very quickly. And what the beauty of that is typically you'll get, 6 months free, and then it's a volume contract. So you pay by volume. So if things are going well, you pay a little bit more. If things pull back, you don't have to pay so much. So you can manage cash flow so much better in the model. I think the model itself, it gets to a certain point where it's no longer economical, but I've never kept a company that long. I've got to the point where I think now probably some full-time employees would be quite useful. That's typically where I exit, because I don't want to be, that's not me. And interestingly, when I sold my first company, it's still out there. You can look it up online, Qual Medical, QOL Medical. I sold it to Cooper Capital. I started it with $200 in 2003 and sold it in 2009, I think it was, for 105.5 million. So that's a nice success story, right? But when I sold it, it was just me. Within 2 years, they hired 68 full-time people. And the company it's doing slightly better than when I had it, but not to the justification of hiring 68 people. So I think, so the people at Cooper Capital's people came in and said, well, I'm a sales guy. I don't know anything about finance. I better hire a CFO. I never had any of those people. I just hired what I needed when I needed it. And to be honest with you, it was so much fun, because you've got none of the pressure. You can just have fun as an entrepreneur. If everyone else is doing the work, you become more like instead of a supervisor, you become more like a conductor of an orchestra. I can't play any of the instruments like the people in the orchestra, but I know harmony. And so my job is just to make it all work together. And that's why the 5-hour workday pretty much works, because after a certain point of time, and it's not long, maybe 6 months, the best service I can provide to my companies is to get out of the way, let people do their job. And that's one thing I've had to learn is At first, I'd pick up the phone because it's so quiet, and I'd say, "How's things going? I want an update." The temptation to justify my existence in the world. Now I just let it go, and I know that they'll call me if there's an issue I need to get involved in or an opportunity, and that's how it goes.
Very interesting, so we run a virtual business. I only have one employee. It's actually my son because he runs operations. But everybody that we deal with are independent contractors fulfilling all the different types of jobs that you're talking about, for different categories where we, help businesses try to save some money. So it's kind of interesting. I'm glad that we're on the right path. I like this. Maybe I can get to a 5-hour workday if my son will allow me to do that, and my wife as well. But who knows? We'll see what happens.
Your son's probably listening to it and going, "Yes, get him out of the way."
I'm sure my son would appreciate that. I mean, he tells me what to do now. I mean, it's like, I don't even have a choice to do. I can't do things that I used to do anymore. So I guess that's the thinking. That's the path, right? I'm headed on the right path, right? So interesting, the different businesses that you've had. How are expenses for like medical companies different than those of other businesses?
Well, it depends what part of the scale you're on. So as a revenue, my first company was revenue generating, not massive. I got it up to 15 million a year, but because of the virtual model, it was 78% net profit. So hence how I was able to sell it for 105.5, because the multiple, just sure, was a nice number. So that side of it. So when you're on the revenue side, the commercial side of it is highly profitable, and I would argue in some cases way too profitable. When you're in the research and development side of the business, which I was most recently with the cancer drug, it is so expensive, and there are so many unseen challenges. And the ironic thing is that when things go well, the data looks good. That should be a moment of celebration, but it brings in more experimentation and more need to prove that was real to establish it. So it becomes more and more and more expensive, like a snowball. So with that company, I funded that myself, because in my previous company I got quite heavily diluted by bringing in capital, and I didn't need to get diluted so much. I like having investors in the company because they bring much more than the money, but on this occasion I wanted to stretch it out. So I found that in my case, I probably was undercapitalized in the cancer company, and so my advice to a lot of startups is, whatever you think you need, double it. Whatever you think is going to cost, double it. And however long you think it's going to take, at least double it. It's always, and that's not a negative thing. It's just that cash flow is so important, because you could have something brilliant and lose it simply because of not having enough cash to get through that difficult period. So I learned by painful experience to have to do that. I'm very happy now that I didn't bring in investors, obviously, because I'm exiting, and I have I'm in a really good situation equity wise. But for me, I don't know if that answers your question. For me, that was the key learnings for me in that.
Yeah, no, great. We're getting close to the end of our time, but I'd like to ask a few more questions. So tell me about your work as an animal welfare activist, and what exactly is that all about? Because that's kind of pretty cool.
Yeah, that's not my term. So that's my digital marketing people at trevorgblake.com.
Oh, okay.
So they wrote that. So I have an animal sanctuary. It was always a dream of mine to do this. And so, and my wife, it's called Fluffs Inc. So Fluffs, she always called all animals Fluffs. Why, I don't know. I never ask, or never asked. And so the sanctuary became Fluffs. And so our concept was that there are lots of seniors in the world who would love to have an animal, but they can't afford the vet bills, or they're worried about what happens if I die. And there are lots of animals that just need loving, and there's not enough people around for them loving. So we matched the two together. So we would take a senior and a rescued animal, and then my sanctuary takes care of all the vet bills, provides a walker, provides food. So all the senior has to do is think about my dog or my cat, or in one case my goat. And kind of say so we just take away all the pressure and stress of having a pet from people who really want a pet in their lives but feel that they're too old to have one now, which is really sad. And so a lot of these people are on their own, and so the pet and the senior, it's I don't believe in win-win, but if there is such a thing, this would be it. And that kind of expanded, because then we found we rescued some animals that we just couldn't rehome. It's just impossible, partly because we fell in love with them, but partly also because they had an issue like missing an eye or something like that. And so I bought a scruffy piece of land up in Washington. I met somebody who was in a difficult situation post-divorce, but was an animal rescuer. So I said, well, I'll buy your farm on condition that you manage it as an animal rescue. And it was just done on a whim. It felt right intuitively. It felt right for her intuitively, and we've gone from there. So Fluffs is a real life animal sanctuary, and we've taken it to an extra level now, whereby we bring in kids and teenagers that have challenges. They can come in and take care of the animals, and they can be with animals, and they can feel a love that they probably don't get in their home life anymore. And we can teach. I don't teach it, but there's people who are more experienced than I do who will teach parenting skills and things like that. And so it's one of those things that's it's just so rewarding just to be a part of it, to be in a position where you can fund it until it gets self-funding is an absolute honor and privilege. So right now it's self-funding. So all of my proceeds from anything I do at trevorgblake.com. So I have a life-changing course called Transformation. All the proceeds from that go to Fluffs or cancer research and development, and all the real royalties from the books that you mentioned, they also go to the same. Every cent. No, we have no employees. No one takes profit. Every cent goes directly to the animals, and it's probably been that Marc. It's been the most rewarding thing I've done in my life.
Profit with a purpose.
Yeah. It's a wonderful experience. The animals have taught me so much more than we've been able to do for the animals.
Wow, that's so inspiring. It's such a great story. It's a great way to end our interview. I've really enjoyed meeting you virtually. Trevor, it's been a real blessing to hear your story. I hope this inspires a lot of people who are trying to be their own boss into creating a 5-hour-a-day workday, in addition to also creating an impact and giving back to society. So thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
This has been really great. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Marc, and pleasure meeting you too.
You as well.